Team Christ and Team Satan. There are no in-betweeners. No matter how moral you are, no matter how religious you may be, no matter how biblically knowledgeable you might just happen to be, in spite of all of that or anything else, if you have not been born again, if you have not trusted in the biblical gospel to save you, then you are not of the light. You are of the darkness. And all lost individuals are people who are in darkness. All unbelievers, no matter how moral, no matter how religious, no matter how kind, no matter how biblically knowledgeable, all unbelievers are under the dominion of Satan. They are part of the kingdom of sin, and they are spiritually blind. There is no gray area when it comes to this. There are only two categories of humanity. The Gospels speak of the great dividing of humanity into two categories. Jesus referred to these two categories of humanity as, quote, the wheat and the tares, the sheep and the goats, those on his right and those on his left. Believers and unbelievers are declared to be different for one simple reason. That is the reality. They are different. Believers and unbelievers are going to have opposing affections, opposing beliefs, opposing principles, opposing motives, opposing goals, opposing attitudes, and opposing hopes. And so the Old Testament so-called minor prophet that we call Amos asked a very simple question in chapter 3, verse 3 of his letter: can two walk together unless they be agreed? Now, of course, two most certainly can disagree and still tolerate each other, right? People who disagree, I certainly hope, are going to be able to tolerate each other. Two who don't agree can still respect each other. Two who don't agree most definitely need to love each other. But while they can tolerate each other, respect each other, love each other, live in a state of harmony, live in a state of peace, they cannot ever really, truly walk together, because they are walking to two different places. Here is what that means. Christians and non-Christians cannot work together in any spiritual enterprise. I'll say that again. Christians and non-Christians cannot work together in any spiritual enterprise. Now, in earthly endeavors, sure, but not when it comes to anything spiritual. For example, you may have to work at your secular trade side by side with unbelievers. That may be a working, orderly, productive relationship. That's fine. You also might share a leisurely activity with an unbeliever. For example, maybe you have some unbelievers that you get together with and play golf. That's all fine. But believers and unbelievers, while they can share certain earthly pursuits, they cannot be about any spiritual work. And of course, my friends, the spiritual encompasses the moral as well. So what I am saying is this: no matter how much we may love, or we may respect, or even in some ways admire some non-Christian that we may know, what we do not do is we do not ever listen to them for our moral or spiritual values. If I need advice on how to fix my broken microwave, I can ask an unbeliever such a question as that. That's fine. But if I have a question regarding anything that is of a moral or spiritual nature, that is when I absolutely should not be ever going to an unbeliever for such advice. Let me put it to you like this: we do not give them our ear on matters on which God has already spoken. We do not put ourselves under their influence. This text that is before us this evening is all about the very important doctrine of separation. The doctrine of separation is quite often treated one of three ways. It is either ignored, misunderstood, or taken to unnecessary extremes. Very often, the doctrine of separation is treated one of those three wrong ways. It's either totally ignored, or it's misunderstood, or taken to unnecessary extremes. So first of all, it is quite often ignored. Some organizations that call themselves churches ignore doctrine, instead focusing solely on charity and goodwill. For example, the ecumenical movement says that anyone who identifies with the label of, quote, Christian, we can all hold hands together. But to clearly be at odds with anything that the Bible makes clear is heresy. That's the problem with the ecumenical movement. No, we cannot hold hands with anyone who identifies with the label of Christian, because doctrine matters. Calling yourself a church does not make you good and godly. It's not enough to say we believe in Jesus. We have to be talking about the same Jesus, the biblical Jesus. And Jesus is the Word of God. Therefore, He is the entire Bible. There are so-called churches that may talk about Jesus and may preach some moral things and quote verses to support those moral endeavors, but who yet don't believe that Jesus is the only way to heaven. I'm not in league with any such church. Neither should any Christian be in league with any such church. When you lock arms with someone, you're making a statement that you are on the same team, when the simple reality is you are not. The World Council of Churches would be another such organization that encompasses everyone regardless of their doctrine. So very often, separation is ignored. But when it's not ignored, it is very often misunderstood. One misunderstanding is the idea that Christians, while they're called to be different, the idea that Christians need to be different by any means possible. In other words, the idea at its essence is that Christians need to be different solely and purely for the sake of being different. And that simply is not always true. Okay, take for example the Amish. You can't say that they are not distinct from the world around them. The Amish most certainly are distinct from the world around them. But does that distinction necessarily make them better Christians? Is that what Paul had in mind here. That we should all be like the Amish in this passage. That if the world drives cars, we should ride horses. If the world has electric lights, then we should use candles. Being separated doesn't mean being different by being weird or by being behind the times. It means to be distinct by honoring God's truth regardless of what the culture is doing. Or a third way in which separation can be misapplied is quite simply by taking it too far. For example, there are some things on which two Christians can disagree and can still walk together. Are there some things in the Bible that can be interpreted differently? You think the Bible is saying such and such, and I truly believe the Bible is saying such and such. Are there things that can be put in that category? Yes. Yes. And yet, there are some Christians who take separation too far, saying that every other Christian has to agree on every single tiny, tiny bit of minutia, or else if you don't agree with me on every nook and cranny, every corner to every percentile, then you are either a heretic or you are a worldly Christian. Another way in which separation is taken to extremes would be to isolate yourself from the world. So I'll put it to you like this. Your best friends should be Christians. But if all of your friends are believers, then you're doing something wrong. Because we can't reach the world without interacting with the world. We can't reach the world without having some relationships with lost people. And yet there are some who in the name of Christianity will go live in some little monastery on an isolated island out in the middle of the ocean and never see anybody ever again. I'm just going to worship Jesus for the rest of my life. That is wrong, because you're not going to reach anybody and living in isolation. And I also just have to point out a third way, another way, I already said third way, but another way in which separation can be taken to an incorrect extreme. The Bible never tells us that the unbelief of a spouse justifies divorce. It never says that. If your unbelieving spouse leaves you because of your belief in Christ, that's one thing. But don't ever leave your spouse because of your spouse's unbelief. That's exactly what Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 10 through 14. Now, we've said all of this about separation, but there's another important aspect to separation that doesn't always get the emphasis that it should. And that is the fact that separation is not only about what you're separated from, it's about what you are separated unto. You're being separated unto Christ. It is not only about the negative, it's also about the positive. And the positive is Christ. In verses 11 through 13, we see that we come to fellowship with God and with His people. Christians find themselves surrounded with the world. We do. We are inundated with the world's messaging. We are inundated with the world's messaging on television, the internet, radio. By all means necessary, the world is telling you and I everything that the wicked world has to say. But at the same time, we don't come to church and participate in Christian activities solely in order to get away from the influence of ungodly people. But also, we come to church in order to be around godly people. Christians who choose the world over God's team, such Christians are practicing an unrequited love. And Paul here describes that unrequited love in verse 11. O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open unto you, our heart is enlarged. Now first, you have the simple one-letter word, O. The O is called a transitive O. O is a word that in and of itself means nothing other than pure emotion. Think about that. The word O all by itself is not conveying any information. It's only conveying pure emotion. This emotion is what Paul is emitting here, and it's because he is yearning out of love for them. The love of the church has to be there to help Christians turn away from the world. They have to know not only are they turning their back on the world, but they're also turning towards the love of Christ being consistently seen and felt through the love of the church. Paul then says that their mouth is open. This means, what he is saying is, we have spoken freely. Let me use a colloquial expression, we have spilled our guts. That's basically what he's saying. Man, we have spilled our guts to you guys. That we have put it all out on the table. That's basically what he's saying. Then he says, our heart is enlarged. The idea is the heart is big and the heart is open towards you. My heart is open to receive you, to do anything for you. I'm an open book. I love you. Verse 12, ye are not straitened in us, but ye are straitened in your own bowels. Okay, that word straight, think about when Jesus said, straight is the way that leads to life. So the idea of straight is narrow, hard to get through, very, very thin. That's the idea of straightened, is to be narrowed, to be restricted, to be limited, to be held back. That's what he is talking about here. And notice what he says. You have not been held back or restricted or narrowed because of us, but because of yourselves. You have held yourself back in your own affections. You see, friends, the church has to open up its heart toward you, toward everyone. But at the same time, a person has to also open up their heart towards it. That's what he's saying here. In verse 11, he's saying, we are open towards you. But verse 12, he's saying, the problem is you guys are not opening up towards us. That's the unrequited love that Paul is experiencing. Paul is loving them while the world is not loving them. And yet, they're not opening themselves up to Paul, but to the world. Verse 13. Now for a recompense, so meaning in like exchange, or please render love back. This is what we're doing. Now please give it back. Verse 13, I speak as unto my children. So this applies to Christians. Then verse 13 says, be ye enlarged. Here Paul is saying to them, open up to us. Like going to the doctor, and the doctor says, now open up and say, ah. That is what Paul is imploring for them to do towards those who are actually giving them the truth. Not the false teachers, not the wicked world, but the true apostles. He's saying basically, we are doing everything we can, but you guys have got to give us something back. You've got to listen to us. You've got to open up to us. For a Christian to turn away from the world, that Christian needs to do what Paul is asking them to do here. Open up that Christian's heart toward Christ and toward God's people. You must be separated unto Christ and the things of the kingdom. Then we see in verses 14 through 18, come away from the world and its people. In verse 14, Paul says, be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. Now, the word yoked refers to working together in a partnership. The Apostle Paul very likely had in mind Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 10, where God says through Moses, thou shalt not plow with an ox and a donkey together. So you need to plow your field. You need two animals to pull your plow. Moses says, do not use an ox and a donkey that would then be yoked together physically for the pulling of the plow. So, why not? Why would it not be a good idea to yoke an ox and a donkey together? And the reason is because they are different. Very, very different animals. They have different natures. They have different strengths. And just like that, the lost and the saved cannot work together in the spiritual realm. They cannot do the work of God as one because they are two different animals. You understand, Satan does not want to attack the church as much as Satan desires to join the church. Satan's ploy is to subtly influence the members of the church through the world and have an unequally yoked partnership between Christians and the wicked culture. In the following verses, Paul makes 5 points about Christians joining hands with unbelievers in any spiritual endeavor. And Paul says that to do that is irrational, sacrilegious, disobedient, unprofitable, and ungrateful. Look at verses 14 through 17. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? And what concord hath Christ with Belial? Or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Wherefore, come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Now, when it comes to the need for separation from the world, when it comes to that subject, it is dangerous to highlight any group in particular because the need for separation affects every single believer. But, with that being said, there is one group in particular who desperately need separation, or else it's going to put them on the wrong path. And the group of which I speak is Christian young people. Christian young people are being raised by the world. They are getting their values from lost people, not from saved people. Lost people such as lost celebrities, lost educators in the public school system, lost musicians, lost people in the media, in movies, and many, many of their lost, lousy friends. They are surrounded with lost voices, and most of them are not under any of the influence of the church and are not being taught anywhere how to think biblically. Now, part of it is the church's fault for failing to educate them. Part of it is their fault for for choosing to listen to unbiblical voices. And of course, the fault of the parents for not making sure that their kids are surrounded with the truth. That is first and foremost the responsibility of the mothers and fathers. Here are a few examples of how Christian young people are getting their thinking from the world and therefore are not thinking biblically. Number one is premarital sex. Young people listen to the world that tells them premarital sex is okay, and they are listening to the world and not to anyone giving them the Word of God. Homosexuality. The world says that homosexuality is natural. The world tells them that that's just how some of us are made. And instead of receiving the truth that homosexuality is unnatural, that it is a sickness, that it is not anyone's friend, that homosexuality is the enemy of the homosexual, that it will not satisfy you, it will not make your life better, it is not the answer to your sexual confusion. But they're not listening to that. They're not getting that. They're only listening to the world. So another would be gender dysphoria and how one should react to gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is when you don't feel good about your gender and you desire to change it. The world says that if you feel that way, then the answer is for you to give in to the lie that you are being told in your mind. Simply start being the gender that your biology has not made you to be. Our children have to know the truth. No happiness can ever be found in living a lie. And transgenderism is a lie. You can never be anything other than what God made you. Another one would be feminism. Modern feminism basically says that because the genders are equal, therefore there is no difference. No distinction needs to be made between male and female. Another one would be the age of the earth. The world says that the planet is billions of years old. Well, that's completely contrary to what the Bible has to say about the creation of the world and the history of the planet, and that it would have been created approximately 6,000 years ago. Another one, taking God's name in vain. The world does it, and it's fine, is what the world says. Unfortunately, most Christian young people are hardly separated from Satan's kingdom of darkness unto Christ's kingdom of light. But rather, more often than not, they're separated the other way around. many Christians are holding the world's hand, and they are not holding Christ's hand. And it's as simple as the fact that they need to let go of the world's hand and instead cling to Christ and to His truth. Then we see also that for Christians to hold hands with lost people is irrational. Hold hands means to work with them in a spiritual endeavor, which would include getting our spiritual or moral doctrine from them. So Paul says this is irrational. If we believe basic biblical truth, just basic, Christianity 101, if we believe that, then working with lost people does not make any sense. And Paul shows that it is irrational by asking 4 rhetorical questions, with the first rhetorical question being this: what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? Now, the word fellowship here is not koinonia, but rather it is a Greek word that's used only here, and it literally means partnership. Another version of the Greek word used here in verse 14 is used in Luke 5:7 to make reference to literal business partners in the fishing industry. So that right there gives you the flavor, the idea of this word, working together. Obviously, not all Christians, what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? Obviously, not all Christians act particularly righteous. And not all lost people always necessarily come across as being very unrighteous. That's true. But Christians have nevertheless been declared righteous positionally. And they have a righteous nature through their new birth. Thus, righteousness defines them. Our righteousness in Christ defines us before God, and it really ought to define us before man. Whereas lost people, they have no righteousness of any kind and are incapable of doing so. Their only righteousness lost people possess are the filthy rags that Isaiah speaks of in Isaiah 64:6. Unrighteousness, or the idea of the Greek word, is lawlessness. That is what defines them. And that defines them because they are not under the rule of the Lord of righteousness, and they cannot be. Verse 14 then asks a second rhetorical question. And what communion hath light with darkness? Can light and dark exist in the same place at the same time? It cannot. For what is darkness? Darkness is the absence of light. Thus, light and darkness are mutually exclusive. Everyone loves to shout, "Be inclusive." It's so important that we be so inclusive. But truth, by its very nature, is exclusive. Truth and untruth are mutually exclusive. A lost person cannot be tuned in to God's frequency. A lost person is spiritually blind. A blind man might happen to stumble across the truth every now and then, but he cannot walk in the light, for he is blind. Christians who walk in the light should not be following the lead of the blind. Verse 15, he asks a third rhetorical question. What concord hath Christ with Belial? Now, the Greek word here for concord comes from the Greek word symphonesis, from which we get our English word symphony. What symphony does Christ have with Belial? Are those two playing musical instruments to the same tune? I don't think so. Christ and Satan are never playing the same song. Christ hates Satan. We should hate everything related to Satan, including his influence through those that are in his kingdom. You have the interesting title there of Belial. And the idea of that name, or the meaning of that name, is worthlessness. Sort of like Beelzebub is another name for Satan in the Bible. Interesting thing about the name Beelzebub, and the same would be true of Belial. Satan would never want to be called Beelzebub or Belial, because Belial means worthlessness, the worthless one. And Beelzebub literally means Lord of Flies. Why is Satan called Lord of Flies? What does that mean? Because the idea is that he is a dung god. He is a god of garbage. He is the Lord over waste, and that's the idea. Utterly worthless. Satan has never, ever had a good idea. Therefore, Christians should not get their philosophy, their morality, or their worldview from the world, because Satan has never, ever had a good idea. Then a fourth rhetorical question is, or what part hath he that believeth with an infidel? The word infidel, it means unbeliever, and so infidelity, meaning sexual promiscuity, comes from the idea that that's how unbelievers act. Mutually exclusive ideologies, and they are that are also being energized by opposing powers. For a Christian to think that he or she can open up their mind toward the wisdom that a lost individual has to try to impart to them and come out even more righteous because of that is like an ice cube thinking it can spend time with fire and come out even more frozen afterwards. For a Christian to hold hands, all of that was under irrational, but now for a Christian to hold hands with a lost person is also sacrilegious. Definition of sacrilegious, almost said sacrilegious. Okay, sacrilegious, the definition. Violation or misuse of that which is regarded as sacred. That's the idea of sacrilegious. Your heart is sacred to God. You are set apart in order to be God's temple. When you give your heart to that which is against God, well, that is a misuse of God's sacred property. Verse 16 says, "And what agreement hath the temple of God with idols? For ye are the temple of the living God. As God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them. I will be their God, and they shall be my people." Christians should not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers, because all false religion is, as 1 Timothy 4:1 says, the doctrine of demons. Solomon, King Solomon, he was very unequally yoked together with unbelievers, and it led to idolatry. Listen to 1 Kings 11:4. "For it came to pass, when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father." How many Christian young people have been led astray into unbiblical thinking and unbiblical living because they fell in love with an unbeliever? When we open our minds to what those who do not swear allegiance to Christ have to say, when we open our minds to their counsel, we are inviting idols into God's temple. Number 3, for a Christian to be unequally yoked is disobedient. Verse 17 says, "Wherefore come out from among them, and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing." You know, so far, Paul has made only one imperative sentence. Imperative sentence meaning a command. He has made several interrogative sentences. That's asking a question. He's made several interrogative, rhetorical sentences, but he has only made one imperative sentence. And all of those rhetorical, interrogative sentences are now bookended with another imperative sentence, which is this: come out. Come out. Come out. Though it reminds us of the Old Testament and fleeing Sodom as an example, and though there may be a few times in life in which geographically leaving a place is called for, by and large, it doesn't mean geographics. But in terms of spiritual fellowship, in terms of sharing your mind, come out from among them. And then he writes, be separate. That means come out and stay out. Stay out of their influence. Stay out of their fellowship. His use of the term unclean thing is an Old Testament imagery that he is using there. And he's doing so metaphorically, meaning in this case, a thing is probably not a literal object, but rather it's an idea, an unbiblical idea. And he's saying, don't touch that unclean idea. By considering the idea, we are touching it. For a Christian to be unequally yoked is also unprofitable. The rest of verse 17 and then verse 18 and then verse 1 of the following chapter says this: "And I will receive you, and will be a father unto you, and ye shall be my sons and daughters, saith the Lord Almighty. Having therefore these promises, dearly beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God." Failing to cut off fellowship from unbelievers cuts off fellowship from God, and that therefore hinders us. Fellowship with unbelievers will always lead to filthiness of the flesh, sinful activities, and filthiness of the spirit, unbiblical notions. Tonight, who are you listening to? What influences are you yoked to that you need to get unyoked to? Are you trying to serve both God and the world, holding hand in hand with Christianity and a wicked world at the same time, while God is saying, if you want to be my blessed son and daughter, come out from among them and be ye separate? Do you need to separate yourself tonight? Is there a decision you need to make for God this evening? As we stand to our feet and sing this hymn of invitation together, I invite you to come forward and kneel at this altar and make that decision. Give that specific thing over to God.